by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. During the question and answer session, please press star 1 on your touch-tone phone. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. And now, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Ms. Joyce Rose. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to Webinar 3 of our Back to Basics series. This webinar will continue a review of the initial stages of a child welfare project lifecycle and is brought to you on behalf of the Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families, Children's Bureau, and is presented by ICF International. I am Joyce Rose, your host and moderator for today's webinar. Joining me a bit later will be Lynette Carlson of New Mexico and Tressa Young of Ohio. So, changes in funding availability and priority mean that opportunities for in-person discussions and networking among professionals working on state child welfare IT systems will be limited this year and likely in future years. Through this webinar series, the Division of State Systems within the Children's Bureau is offering a venue for information sharing and discussion. We will be offering 6 webinars, 1 per month, between April and September 2013. While the webinars offer some structured content, our goal is that they spark discussion and information sharing within and across state and federal attendees. The webinars are intended not just for child welfare IT systems managers, but also the staff with whom they work, who are key players in getting and keeping child welfare IT systems up and running. Although our series theme is Back to Basics, we invite and encourage participation from both experienced and newer managers and staff, recognizing that even the most experienced among us have something new to learn or may need a refresher. This and all future webinars are being recorded and are being made available online as reference and informational resources for you and your staff. A listserv notification will be distributed once they are posted. And for your information, webinars 1 and 2 are now available online and accessible at the site listed on this slide. Today's third webinar in the Back to Basics series, the Child Welfare Information Technology System Project Lifecycle Part 2, is a continuation of the high-level review of key project stages. Part 1 of this 2-part offering was completed last month. The next webinar, Webinar 4 in our series, in the Back to Basics series, is entitled Common Pitfalls and How to Avoid Them, currently scheduled for the end of July. Topics for the final 2 webinars have not yet been determined, but please watch for more information. In terms of participating in today's webinar, attendees are encouraged to participate in our webinar with questions and comments. All of our attendee lines are muted now, but we will open them at the end of the presentation for Q&A. You also can submit questions at any time through the GoToWebinar chat feature, and those questions will be answered at the conclusion of the presentation. Now, should we run out of time, we will respond to your questions via email, or should you have additional questions, you may submit those to me at the email address listed on this slide, joyce@kassets.com. We are extremely interested in knowing who is attending this webinar in terms of position or capacity. It is our intent throughout all of the Back to Basics webinars to make the content applicable and attractive for all disciplines participating in a state SACWIS or CWIS effort. We ask that you self-select one of the 5 categories listed. Also recognizing that not all states are SACWIS states, and to be inclusive of everyone, we will use the more generic Child Welfare Information System, CWIS, identifier. I'm now going to ask my colleague, Elizabeth, to conduct the poll and then provide the results.
Okay, so the poll should be up on your screen, and I see we have people responding. And I'll give you all just a few more seconds here to get your responses in. And it looks like for today, 13% are Child Welfare Information Systems Project Managers, 27% are CWIS Program Managers, 33% are CWIS Technical Managers, 7% are project staff, and the remainder are ACF Children's Bureau personnel.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And for your information, I actually could see the poll this time.
Oh, wonderful.
So that is a wonderful representation, and we thank you all for attending. So let's quickly look at today's agenda, which is I will be doing some introductions. We're going to then talk about implementation, moving to maintenance operations, and then our two wonderful state guest presenters are going to talk about a wide variety of federal requirements, and I think you will find it all very interesting. We'll follow that with hopefully a rousing Q&A session, and then we'll do a brief wrap-up. So let's move on to introductions. Our guest presenters probably really need very little introduction, but let me briefly introduce and extend a truly warm welcome to both Lynette and Tressa. Lynette Carlson has been a licensed social worker for 40 years and has 29 years of experience in state child welfare. She has worked on the New Mexico SAC system from implementation in 1997 to present. Lynette combines many years of program experience with her IT business analyst skills, focusing on analyzing and identifying needed modifications to IT systems to meet federal reporting compliance, while maintaining social work best practices and building effective communications between program and IT staff. Tressa Young has been the Bureau Chief Automated Systems, Office of Families and Children, Ohio Department of Job and Family Services since 2008. She has more than 25 years of child welfare experience and degrees and certifications in social work, project management, and business contract management. We are so pleased to have both experienced and qualified individuals as our guest presenters, and myself, formerly the project director for the state of Wisconsin SACWIS project, retiring from state service several years ago, and then becoming involved with several ACF Children's Bureau sponsored training events since that time. So let's start this webinar by reviewing the implementation stage of the project lifecycle, looking at the pilot phase, and we will include the challenges of training here. So what's a pilot? A pilot release is a deployment of new software to a controlled production environment or a subset of users performing their normal business tasks. The purpose of a pilot is multifold. Primarily, a pilot demonstrates and supports the goal that the application design works as expected and it truly meets your organization's business and technical requirements. Performance and operational criteria should be developed as part of a pilot evaluation plan prior to the pilot release in order to be able to measure whether the application meets a variety of deliverables and your expectations. The plan may include metrics relating to training and end-user comprehension, response time, system stability, data conversion processes, and usability. Secondly, a pilot is a valuable learning experience whereby informed decisions can be made regarding the full statewide implementation process. Thirdly, the lessons learned and applied from a successful pilot reduces the organization's risk during full-scale deployment. Pilot releases generally happen in succession. For example, you might deploy the application to a limited number of users, a specific county or locality, whereby feedback from these users is then used to evaluate the results and resolve issues that may arise. Then an updated release of the application is redeployed to those same pilot participants, and the pilot evaluation process is repeated until the project manager, under advisement from the release team, decides the application and the organization are ready for full statewide implementation. A major component in the success of any computerized system is the people who use it. Therefore, effective end-user training is essential to implementing, gaining end-user acceptance, and use of a child welfare information system. However, it was my experience that training was both challenging and frustrating prior to and during implementation, and in fact, our training strategy changed throughout the statewide implementation process. In the realm of educational endeavors for adults, these 4 tenets of adult learning may assist your project to form a training strategy and curriculum for your project. Adults want to learn only what they need to know. Secondly, adults want to understand why specific information is important to learn. Adults want training when they need it, not before. And adults want to learn at their own pace, not the group pace. So keeping the tenets in mind, a successful training program will convince the skeptics that a staff list is both crucial and necessary. A good initial impression of the project can be established by means of effective training. Properly trained staff will have a superior comprehension and awareness of the project. Without proper training, the success of the Child Welfare Information System initiative is really at risk because training is what gives the end users the required skills and knowledge to reach anticipated levels of productivity. Training produces greater confidence, which translates into the end user entering data correctly. Appropriately trained end users will use the system more efficiently and effectively, decreasing their dependence on support. Bottom line, proper system implementation commences with training of the end users, who really are the most important component of a large child welfare information system in becoming successful. The pilot phase should also be used to assess training approaches and whether one or multiple types of training produce the best outcomes. We all know that not only do people learn differently, but also adults have specific learning tenets, which we just reviewed. So providing a combination of training methodologies may best accommodate the variety of your targeted end users. The combination of training may include initial classroom instructor-led, followed up by one-on-one sessions, and of course, the emergence of assorted e-learning technology. Webcasting using webcams to set up a virtual classroom, webinars like we are using today, podcasting, YouTube, Twitter, or self-paced online classes expand the training possibilities enormously and provide a broad spectrum from which to choose from, as well as providing a reduction in training costs. However, be prepared to provide capsulized training specific to an end user's business needs, as well as those with different levels of computer skills. Bottom line, schedule enough training time and types to assure the end users are prepared. Plan on everything taking more time than what was expected. And finally, don't schedule training too far in advance so end users forget what they've learned prior to implementation. So we're going to move now to our second attendee poll, but I want to introduce it by saying that in October of 2012, the Center for Learning and Performance Technologies released the results of their annual Learning Tools Survey. Topping the list of the 100 tools for learning in 2012 was Twitter at number 1 and YouTube at number 2. If you are curious as to what else made the list, just do a Google search on top 100 tools for learning in 2012. Of interest on this list is whether any state present in today's webinar may be using either Twitter or YouTube as e-learning tools. Now, having done some research, I found that Utah, Washington, and California, and there may be many more, have their own YouTube channels focusing on public outreach and, in some cases, employee training. If you look at the utah.gov website and hover over the Connect option on the top banner, you will find all sorts of social media connections, including Facebook, Twitter, Google+, YouTube, podcasts, etc. The Georgia Sackless Shines training unit actually tried using YouTube for end-user training, but found that their training videos tended to be too long for what YouTube allows. Thus, they abandoned the YouTube media for application training. Now, I believe the standard allowable length of a YouTube video is 15 minutes and 30 seconds. So that actually would be a constraint if you were considering using that medium for application training. So, Elizabeth, let's now find out what or if our attendees are using regarding any of the e-learning tools for end-user training.
Okay, we have launched the poll. If people could start choosing.
I understand this is yes, it's a multiple choice, right? You can select all that apply.
Yes.
Right.
We'll go ahead and give people just another minute here to respond. Okay, if anyone else wants to go ahead and get a vote in, I'm just about to close it. Okay. And it looks like with the webinar closed now, or with the poll closed, we have 13% using webcasting with webcams or a virtual classroom, 67% webinars or podcasting, no one reported using YouTube or Twitter, 60% using online self-paced courses, and 33% are using a combination of all of the above.
That's actually, I was not surprised by the YouTube or Twitter percentage. Again, as I said, there are certainly some constraints with using those media. But I think we are consistent in terms of using webinars and webcasting and online self-paced courses. And it's obvious that not one media serves the 100% of the challenges, so a combination is really what I would have expected to see and did see. So thank you so very much. So moving along here, once we get through pilot, it's then time to focus on full statewide implementation and maintenance and operations. So a carefully defined, communicated, and rigorous statewide implementation plan is needed in order to meet the project goals encompassing implementation schedules and quality of service. Some of the criteria that can be applied to determine application implementation readiness are, in terms of staffing, obviously you need to assemble the right implementation team. I think it's critical that you select staff who are willing and able to handle multiple tasks simultaneously and who can work under pressure to meet critical deadlines. You would probably want to include technical experts who understand the technical aspects of development and implementation, and even better, if they know SACWIS or child welfare business models, that's an absolute plus. You want to bring the trainers onto the implementation team early on so they can establish a timeline for training, prepare course materials and curriculum, organize training facilities, all the while helping to ensure that end users are prepared when the application arrives. Include experts or power users, certainly good testers for quick fix items, and determine what level and who on the team will provide on-site support at key urban and small locations during implementation. Develop and include local subject matter experts or SMEs on the implementation team, but I think it's critical that you try to avoid using those SMEs who are also assigned day-to-day casework. So for schedule, we want to determine a schedule that allows sufficient time for the upfront development of the application, interface programs, and data conversion routines. We need to determine a schedule whereby the number of implementation teams and phases are limited in order to reduce risk, balance workload, and ensure maximum manageability. It's important to design a schedule whereby statewide end users are implemented based upon geographic locations to realize efficiencies of planning, training, travel, and ongoing support in order to control project costs. In regards to communication, it's important to identify key end user partners who are well respected and leaders in statewide child welfare organizations, whereby being the early adapters and implementers of the child welfare application positively influences others' participation. We need to effectively communicate that the child welfare application ultimately reflects an effective information system strategy encompassing local, state, and federal shared core values and guiding principles that, 1, the system assists in the delivery of services to at-risk children and families more effectively and promptly. 2, that the system facilitates interagency coordination by providing immediate information. 3, the system addresses the essential need to develop better shared information about each child who is separated from his or her family. 4, the system responds to local, state, and federal information and reporting requirements with the most up-to-date aggregate, case level, and management reports. And finally, that the system supports consistent, timely, and effective child welfare practices. And there are any number of communication vehicles and methods that can be used to get the message out and keep end users informed in a timely manner, certainly ranging from the old-fashioned email distribution to webinars, webcasts, podcasts, and even potentially venturing into the social media world. And I think our poll showed that at least our attendees today are, in fact, using the combination of webinars, webcasts, podcasts for training, but also, I'm sure, for the whole communication challenges. So, maintenance operations. A successful transition from development to maintenance and operations begins at the very beginning of the project lifecycle and continues through the development and implementation stages to the system maintenance stage. Maintenance and operations then continues until and if the system is retired. Once the system has been implemented in one or many locations, the system begins its shift to maintenance and operations M&O status. The transition from development to M&O needs to be carefully monitored. Outstanding system fixes must be identified, addressed, and prioritized before the initial project is closed out. This transition can be difficult. During development, team leaders, team members, and system users become accustomed to fast turnaround related to system problem solving. Once the system moves into the M&O status, subsequent system changes get added to a queue whereby careful change management and prioritization processes must be in place, as the dedicated project team may no longer be available or in place. This reality increases the importance of making sure that the system is working satisfactorily, that all final acceptance criteria have been met, and that the maintenance team is ready to assume application support. While development and implementation may be over, you're left with a newer and probably bigger system to maintain and operate. Make sure the help desk for the system is ready to answer questions concerning the new system features and the general procedures and processes that are in place to provide support to end users. An ongoing training plan will be required. New end users will need training, and trainers will need to add and maintain training material covering system enhancements to their regular course curriculum. Similar scope expansion is required in the area of technical support. Once implementation is complete, the staff providing ongoing system maintenance and support will rely upon good system documentation to troubleshoot and fix system or application problems. It is strongly recommended and best practice that an organization develop system documentation standards. By standardization of system documentation, the support team can be assured that all relevant information is available for each system component, and this information can be accessed and updated as needed through a version control tool. So now let us move to a rather lengthy review of federal requirements, and I'm going to invite Tressa Young to speak to an assortment of federal requirements, starting with the APDU. Tressa?
Good afternoon.
Okay, keep going.
I'll be discussing high-level requirements and lessons learned, tips for completing advanced planning document updates, SACWIS assessment review guides, and preparing for on-site federal reviews and monitoring visits. There's many ways to approach these requirements, and I'm grateful for the help that I've received along the way from other states who've been willing to share their documents with me, and also with the state and vendor staff team that I work with here in Ohio, who take the time to review the work and push the team to do the best work that we can. So it's definitely a group effort, and I would encourage those of you who are in the audience, if you haven't reached out to other states, to do so, because that was a big help to me along the way in improving our work here. In terms of the advanced planning document update, most of you probably know that is a high-level plan that is due that basically grants the state funding for your SACWIS project. It's due 60 days prior to the end of your authorized budget cycle. Typically for the advanced planning document updates, you do include a schedule, and for the funding cycle is typically an annual funding cycle. So the project schedule for the annual period is typically more detailed, but ACF does like to see a project for the full life of the project. I'm sorry, a schedule for the full life of the project. Again, the reason you want to make very clear in your advanced planning document update that your development funding request is very clear, and it's preferred that you make the request that you are asking for development funding in your cover letter very clear to the analyst when you're submitting your document. These are lessons learned for me and that I thought others might be able to learn from. And again, there's probably many ways to approach the advanced planning document update process. I like to get the easy things out of the way, so the attachments, all those things that you need, your cost allocation approval letters, your table organizations, all of the attachments ahead of time so that I don't need to worry about getting those when the plan is due. I also learned, I think early when I started, my descriptions of our project work or development work were a little lengthy, and I learned over time that I really need to make those succinct. Our federal analysts have a lot of work to review, so they do want to know enough detail to understand what we're proposing or you're proposing to do with the system, but it needs to be succinct and flow well to ease the amount of time that it takes for the federal analyst to review the document. Another lesson learned for us that sounds really obvious in terms of using consistent project initiative terms really wasn't obvious for me. Sometimes early on when I started, we would use different names for different initiatives across required documents. Over time, I began to be much more consistent and make sure that any project term was the same across all federal documents as well as all state documents. So within the APDU, I use consistent project initiative terms, and I typically, in the sections where I'm talking about what work we're going to do, cross-reference the APDU budget, like where the item is in the budget, where the item is on the schedule, and then I typically cross-reference which SARG element or which SACWIS assessment review guide element or compliance requirement is being referred to when I'm describing that project initiative. And finally, another lesson learned was to make sure that those initiatives, the names of those initiative projects were always the same, and that the coding, on any vendor invoice and the claims that we submitted to ACF all matched up and were the same. And it made it much easier when it came time to do our APDU budgets because we knew exactly basically what money we had spent and what money we had claimed. And we reviewed that regularly, which made the APDU process much easier. Again, using those consistent terms makes it easy when you need to create additional budget documents. Our state is on a state budget year instead of a federal fiscal year. And it also makes it easy if you want to use items from your APDU for other plans, such as the 4B plan. Another just lesson learned or to do is I typically maintain, we have a lot of pilots. We're blessed in Ohio to have a lot of pilots that are going on, and I maintain documentation of those pilot projects so that, again, I'm not needing to do that at the last minute when the APDU is due. Probably the most important, or one of the most important pieces of doing an APDU is making sure that you've involved all the stakeholders and the various teams and your federal analysts and your leadership in reviewing the document prior to the document being submitted. And in Ohio, we really have made these federal requirements, these documentation requirements, a training tool. So we use the advanced planning document process as well as the other cycles assessment review guide documentation process I'll talk about as actual training tools. And we have multiple teams participate in the development and in the review of those tools. We also use the SACWIS components matrix. And if you don't have a copy of that, I would advocate for you to ask for one from your federal analyst. It's just a very simple matrix of the components requirements, and I've always used that as an attachment in my APDU. It's just a nice reference guide that you can look at easily. Your federal analyst as well as your team can see what progress you've made on various compliance requirements since the last visit or since the last APDU submission. Again, if you need development funding, it's important to ensure that the language and the business case that you're describing in your APDU describes new functionality or significant change in the application. And obviously problem areas or large initiatives shouldn't be new to your leadership, and they should be discussed in advance with your federal analyst. Another lesson learned for me is in the beginning we had quite a few metrics, and metrics can be helpful, or they can also raise additional questions and not be all that useful. So if you have lots of metrics that say, lots of things about load time or things that might matter maybe to a very technical person, but to the end user or to the folks who are using the system might not be that important. Those are the kind of metrics sometimes that might frustrate a reviewer. So metrics are good as long as they're meaningful and that they're standardized. So things that we like to include here are, the response time from our help desk and whether or not we're seeing a decrease in issues or how we've used the information from the help desk, feedback on our training or our technical assistance and our knowledge base, and feedback from our users on enhancements that we've implemented, and then some performance data. And we do link in sometimes information related to how the system is either being improved to support goals that we have for visitation standards or our performance improvement plan or the Child and Family Services review. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the SACWIS Assessment Review Guide documentation. And this is a rather comprehensive document that is really the foundation of the SACWIS documentation for your system. The document is due 90 days prior to an on-site review or your compliance review. And there are many attachments that are required with what is referred to as the SARJ. So it's a good idea to make sure that you've reviewed those in advance and talk with your analyst about how they prefer to receive all those attachments and which ones they want to see at what period. So before, as you begin basically working on the document, I would suggest having a discussion with your analyst about their preferences. In Ohio, again, like I said, we use these processes as training opportunities for staff. And so for us, to develop one from scratch took about 10 months. And for us to do an update would take about 3 months. And again, just helpful tips for us. We had, when we were putting the documentation together of the system and how it met the compliance standards, one person basically owned the gold, what we call the gold copy. And again, we used the SACWIS components matrix that I talked about before to keep track of, which business analyst or which technical person might be working on a particular assignment or portion of the SARJ. And we broke the SARJ down into tiny, manageable chunks, literally emails, with the title, with the compliance element on it. And we might do, a few a day, but we didn't send out like big, large sections because if you have a lot of other work going on, deployments and user support and other things, you don't want to, pull people away for big extended periods of time. And they tend to do a better job if they're just focusing on a small amount of work that's manageable. And as we discussed before, we did use the standard naming convention for each of the section assignments. Another thing that we did that we found helpful, the ACF SACWIS 101 presentation of all of the SACWIS compliance findings. We took the PowerPoint slides that ACF published, and we cut and pasted the compliance components required in the SARG in each of those question areas, just to make sure that our documentation was actually answering the question that had been asked. We also listened to those presentations. There was rich discussion in them around things that ACF wanted to see in those various compliance areas, and all of those who worked on the SARG found that to be helpful. Again, it sounds obvious, but you know, throughout the document there are questions that are very sometimes repetitive. And at first, I'll be honest, I was a little perturbed by that until I realized that sometimes we weren't answering the question the same each time. So I would say if there is a question that is in the SARG and it's asked more than once, and there sometimes is, make sure that you are answering it the same way each time. Again, something that we did was we used our SARG. We actually took the SARG and we followed along with it as if we were walking through our functionality, because the SARG is basically, again, the foundation of what ACF will look at when they come on site to review your system. And you really want them to have as good of understanding as they can of your system before they come on site, so that you make the most of the time that you have during the review, as well as that you have a successful review where your functionality is easily understandable. In the SARG, we use consistent formatting font for system tabs and functions and navigations. Again, it was almost like a how-to document in terms of using the application. We had extensive reviews, we had subject matter experts, and then we work on teams here, so it was amazing to have teams actually review the SARG documents, because it really helps with how different perspectives see language that's written, and to have teams reviewing the work to make sure that the language and the description matches the understanding of the functionality. These are quick, some lessons learned for preparing for a compliance review or a monitoring visit. Again, this is probably one of the most critical things, is have methods to obtain feedback from your users, and know what your users are saying about your system long before ACF comes on site, and communicate that user feedback to your federal analysts before they come. You don't want your review to be the first time that a federal analyst is hearing about an issue that a user has, or you don't want a user basically describing functionality completely differently than how you have indicated that your system works. So I'm pretty upfront about issues that we have, things that we're working on in the user community to improve use of the system. This was another lesson learned from us, is to make sure that you assess any dependent environment that you have before your on-site visit, and any data or interfaces that may be having maintenance or testing or demonstrations, and making sure that you have backup of any data that you're going to need access to for your actual on-site review. Leadership, attendance, knowledge, and support for your review makes a big difference. I've been very thankful that Ohio's had strong leadership and participation in our review, and I think it's improved the quality of our reviews. Again, when you're doing the presentations or demonstrations for an actual on-site review, you should anticipate that your federal analyst is not going to follow the happy path. So when you're helping staff prepare for the demonstration, they need to understand that although the system ideally functions in a certain way, and that data is entered typically in a certain way, the federal analyst is going to ask you to go off that path and look at the screen and say, oh, well, what happens if I do this? Or what happens if it doesn't do that and I go there? That's something that we really should just help staff be prepared for as they get ready for any kind of federal on-site review. And it's also helpful to let the federal analysts do that, and to let them take the lead on what they want to see when they're looking at the screen. Always have more than one example ready. You will be asked, for example, show me how such and such, show me how the system makes a service referral. Always have more than one example, because you'll probably be asked for more than one. The audience of the folks who are participating in these reviews from the federal team typically have different perspectives. I tried to help my team understand the different perspectives of the audience of the federal review team. Some of the team were more interested in items that might relate to the CFSR or your performance improvement plan, or maybe 4E audits or 4E eligibility. Some folks were looking more at the system in terms of reporting or literal SACWIS compliance or SACWIS functionality. These, again, were just kind of fun things that we just recently had a review, and these are the kind of things that I really tried to help my team understand that make your federal analysts go, or make them give you more additional questions. Every time they're looking at a screen, they're always going to be asking themselves, is there anything on that screen that should pre-populate or come from somewhere else? They're going to be watching as you're doing the demonstration. Did you have to enter it more than once? They're going to be looking at values that are on the screen and looking to make sure that value is used consistently throughout the application. When you're showing functionality, they're going to be asking for you to show or to demonstrate whether or not there's an audit trail for that information. They'll be thinking about, hey, does this meet a validation rule? If I don't do this and I put in, that the person's 2,000 years old or something like that, does the logic of the business flow make sense or meet a validation rule? They're always looking for ease of use for end users and whether or not data is easy to edit. And as we talked about the SACWIS Assessment Review Guide documentation, they're going to be thinking about that documentation and watching the demo and trying to make sure that they match up, that there are not inconsistencies. And again, as we discussed, they're going to be thinking about when they go out on site to the counties, is the description of how the system is used by the users or the caseworker match the demo and also your SARS documentation. And again, the helpful part of the review is the perspective of always looking at the system to think about, are there ways the system can be used to keep children safer or to improve practice. And these are just the federal reference guides for these documents. And I also wanted to share, even though it's not on the slide, that we do have a knowledge base that is available on the web. It's //jfsKB.com/SACWIS/, and I can give that to Joyce. But we do have a lot of system documentation out on the web. We also do have, we do use YouTube, and we have quite a few GoToWebinar trainings that are linked to our knowledge base. So anybody who's interested in what we're doing here in Ohio can get that on the web. And I'd be happy to help anyone with any of these processes, so feel free to contact me at any time. Thank you.
Thank you, Tressa. That was very well done, and you certainly covered a lot of material. And yes, I will take you up on your offer to be able to provide the Ohio Knowledge Web URL. So I think it's time now for Lynette to continue with the federal requirements, and she is going to start with FCARS. Lynette?
This is Elizabeth. I actually need to interrupt and apologize to our audience. We are having massive thunderstorms rolling through Fairfax, which is where we're hosting the webinar. So if you're experiencing some intermittent flickering in the audio or video, I just ask that you be patient with us. And Lynette, if it's okay, I'm going to advance your slides for you because I think one of the casualties has been that you have come out of the GoToWebinar as a presenter. Will that be okay?
That's fine. I was wondering about that. So.
Okay, yes. If you could go ahead and start, and I will forward the slides and get to your slide.
Okay, excellent. If you would do that, and I'll just cue you when to transition.
That would be perfect. Thank you so much.
You've got one last thing to do. Good afternoon from the land of enchantment, New Mexico. As you'll see in the slides, I've divided the portion of this part of the webinar into two sections. The first to address FCARS, NCANS, and CFSR, and the second to address NIDed. The purpose in doing this was that the NIDed regulations, design, and implementation began at a much later date, and thus some of the challenges and lessons learned began and occurred in a completely different time frame. In talking about FCARS, as you can see, I have some general information about FCARS and its beginning. Effective in January 21 of 1994, the federal regulations at 45 CFR 1355.4 implemented Section 479 of the 4E of the Social Security Act. These regulations are more commonly known as the AFCARS regulations, which stand for Adoption and Foster Care Analysis and Reporting System, and include dependencies as well as data dictionary, error standards, and the penalty amounts that a Title 40 agency may be assessed if found out of compliance with the AFCARS standards. On January 6, 2012, the interim final rules were published that implemented amendments to Title 4E. As a result of these amendments, conforming changes were made to the AFCARS regulations, including to the appendices, to ensure that the same requirements for data collection and reporting apply to a tribal 4E agency as are currently applied to the Title State 4E agency. AFCARS collects case-level information from state and tribal 4E agencies on all children in foster care and those who have been adopted with the Title 4E agency involvement. ACF uses AFCARS data for a number of reasons, including the following: determining awards for the Adoption Incentive Program, preparing the Child Welfare Outcomes Report, conducting the Child and Family Services Review, conducting Title 4E foster care eligibility reviews, determining the allotment of funds for the Chafee Foster Care Independence Program, conducting trend analysis and short and long-term planning efforts, targeting areas for initial and increased technical assistance efforts, discretionary service grants, research and evaluation, and regulatory change, responding to the requests to data from federal, state, tribal, and private agencies. As you'll see from the slide, there are 66 foster care elements and 37 adoption elements. Children that are included in a foster care population are those who were in foster care for more than 24 hours through achieving permanency, in other words, discharge from all foster care placements through reunification, adoption, emancipation, etc. Examples of the data reported in AFCARS include demographic information on the foster child as well as the foster or adopted parent, the number of removal episodes the child has experienced, the number of placements in the current removal episodes, and current placement setting. As you can see from the slide, AFCARS data is submitted two times per year. There is the reporting period A and there's a reporting period B. And on the slide I've shown those parameter periods as well as the data file submission deadline. As we go to the next slide, one of the things that in talking about references, AFCARS in itself could be a day-long education piece. And obviously we don't have time for that, nor do you want to be on a webinar for that long. So what my real point here is in looking at providing you with AFCARS references is that there are tremendous numbers of resources that are available, and the ACF Children's Bureau website related to AFCARS is a vital resource. In other words, visit it frequently and become good friends with it. It includes policy issuances related to AFCARS as well as other resources such as technical bulletins. In the first bullet, it's a great starting place as it contains general information about AFCARS, including information and links to the next 3 listed bullet sites: policy guidance and resources, AFCARS assessment review guides, and current information on AFCARS assessment review and final report. The second bullet is, as I referenced, provides direct linkage to the Child Welfare Policy Manual, in which Section 1 pertains to AFCARS. The Children's Bureau also issues additional policy documents in the format of PIs and IMs. Some of those being methods for extracting data for submission to AFCARS, changes in the AFCARS file name, decisions regarding AFCARS penalties and AFCARS file name, and AFCARS assessment reviews. It also contains Children's Bureau documents that were issued to supplement the information in the federal regulations and provides additional guidance and assistance to states that Title 4E agencies in developing, implementing, and maintaining their AFCAR systems. AFCAR resources also are technical bulletins, software utilities, federal information processing standard codes, and disability special needs code table. In the fourth bullet, you'll notice that I provided information regarding the National Resource Center for Child Welfare Information Technology. Their website contains information, including webinars, related to AFCARS updates, federal guidance, AFCARS reviews for training and technical assistance, materials, and training and technical assistance examples. If we switch the slide now to NCAN, as you can see, the National Child Abuse and Neglect Data System is what NCAN is. And in this slide, you will see that it is a voluntary data system gathering information from 50 states as well as the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico regarding the reports of child abuse and neglect. It was established in response to the Child Abuse Prevention Act, which was Public Law 93-247 across the country. And key findings are published in the Child Welfare Reports to Congress and the Annual Maltreatment Report. It includes two different submissions, the child file, which is 146 fields, and the agency file, which contains 4 sections regarding preventative services, screened out referrals, response time, and staffing. Historical services of victims and fatalities not on the FACLIS system. And you can see that the NCAN data is submitted 1 time per year, and the parameter periods are October 1 to September 30th, which follows the federal fiscal year, and I have the deadline that is there. What I might make the comment to, because often people will say, how does NCAN compare to AFCARS? And my definition has been that NCAN starts from the moment that your intake person picks up the phone to 90 days past the completion of the child abuse neglect investigation. AFCARS begins the moment that child comes into care, in foster care, excluding the children who have been in care less than 24 hours, through that child being attaining permanency, which could be a very short period of time or it could be at the age of 18. The NCANs, I'm not going to go through all of the resources here because it has the same feel and flavor as the overview that I gave you from the AFCAR section. But it's important to note there is excellent resources regarding technical documentation, survey instruments, program logic, as well as technical assistance. In the case of NCAN, that is through WR McDonald Associates, and I have the website there, as well as there is information that is contained at Cornell University, information and assistance, and they do a lot of data analysis, and that's an excellent resource for you as well. Then having to cover 4 actually federal requirements in a very short period of time. You can see I'm doing very high level, but want to spend most of the time talking about lessons and challenges that New Mexico found. So we're going to move on to the CFSR slide, and as many of you know, the Children Family Services Review enables the Children's Bureau to ensure conformity with the federal child welfare requirements and to determine what is actually happening to children and families as they are engaged in child welfare services, and assist states to enhance their capacity to help children and families achieve positive outcomes. Ultimately, the goal of the federal reviews is to help states improve child welfare services and achieve the following outcomes for families and children who receive services, meaning safety, permanency, and family and child well-being. And by safety, we mean children are the first and foremost protected from abuse and neglect, and the children are maintained safely in their homes whenever possible and appropriate. In permanency, what is indicated is looking and striving for children to have permanency and stability in their living situation. The continuity of family relationships and connections is preserved for families. And family and child well-being strive to have families to have the enhanced capacity to provide for their children's needs. Children receive appropriate services to meet their educational needs, and children receive adequate services to meet their physical and mental health needs. As many of you have participated in the CFSR reviews, there has been a round 1 and a round 2. And, of course, we're kind of waiting for round 3 and the time frames that will be looked at that and how the focus will be. The one thing that's really important to look at in NCANs, you actually have a child file data, which is all the information that comes from your SACWIS system. And then you have an agency file, which actually is looking at things that are not in your SACWIS system, things that are obtained from other sources, and to try to bring together and marry your information for a whole picture. AFCARS gives your submission that, again, comes strictly out of your SACWIS system, complying with those federal regulations. The interesting and most important thing about CSSR is that it is a very extensive, it's not just a data review or data submission. It is actually an on-site review where their team comes in and reviews, reads cases, interviews stakeholders, staff, etc., and is utilized to establish national standards, and then for the state to establish their own goals, commonly referred to as the PIP, or the Program Improvement Guide. And so it's a very extensive and in-depth process. If you go to the next slide, again, I'm taking the same approach, not going through, as you can all go to these resources. And know that as you go to ACF websites, these are just pieces of what's on their website. It's very complete and has a lot of information, regardless if you're a program person or an IT person. So again, looking through the ACF website as far as the process, CSSR process, the planning, information related to CSSR reports and program improvement plans and national summaries. You'll also notice that there is a reference to the National Resource Center for Child Welfare Information and Technology, as they have excellent information on CSSR. And you will notice that there is a website to jdsinternational.com, which has been involved with the on-site review. Now, in finishing this first section of the presentation and looking at some of the challenges and lessons learned related to AFCARS, NCANS, and CSSR, I will go through those and then go a bit around the process of NIDID. As we all know, that's been a new and interesting challenge, but a much-needed data set of information. And looking at New Mexico's challenges and lessons learned, one thing to not be repetitive, many of the things that Teresa said on her things that might make your analyst go, or lessons learned related to SACWIS very much apply to AFCARS, NCANS, and CSSR. One to give you a little bit of a background on New Mexico's system, we call ourselves an antique or a dinosaur. You have to understand that our SACWIS system, which is our single source for all of our data related to CSSR, NCANS, AFCARS, NIDID, Title IV-E, Medicaid, all of those, was created and implemented in 1997. And so we are a client-server base. It's over 16 years old, and it was a transfer system from Connecticut. What we indicate in being that antique is because in 16 years, as we all know, child welfare and information technology have kept an unprecedented rapid pace of change. It used to be that child welfare moved fairly slowly and IT could keep up. Now those are changing at extreme pace, and it's very hard to keep those in sync. The other part is being a client server and not being yet web-based. It becomes an additional challenge in being able to meet the flexibility and the needed changes in order to not just meet federal requirements, but also to meet the needs of our children and our families. One of the first things I'd like to say is that in our lesson learned is we have survived. And we are persevering, and through perseverance is growth. Like one of the things that was probably one of the highest compliments that we had is when the federal ACF has come out and looked at our data, they were truly shocked to find that our transfer system no longer looked like a transfer system. And so it's been a long, hard journey, but one that even though it was a nose to the grindstone, blood, sweat, and tears, and not a short sprint, but a marathon, we did survive. And how we survived, I can encapsulate into a couple of different ways in some of those statistics. One was a strong team. And when I say team, it is a very broad team. It's a federal, using ACF, the state, as far as your state management, your IT, your program staff, the National Resource Centers, to come together and work on the various projects and so that you are capturing data quality. The team emphasis is the partnership relationship that utilizes resources available from ACF and the others to develop a reasonable plan. The other thing in that team, you need to have a strong companion at the executive management level to drive the project. And in that, department management is that you will need their support to make sure that program and IT resources are available. You need to have a proficient programmatic lead who can make decisions on behalf of the program. IT should work at the direction of and in support of the program. Otherwise, you get an automated system that does not meet programming needs. And that is critical. And New Mexico has been very fortunate. If I've worked with other states, often IT will indicate AFCARs, NCANs, CFSR, all of that technical information and data often is being done in the IT shop. And it's been very difficult to get program staff to the table. In other states, I hear it's vice versa. In New Mexico, from the onset, we have had program at the table with IT and working together with our ACF partners in order to meet the need that not only the technological needs, but also for children and families. The other thing in a strong team is teamwork, working together to develop a comprehensive action plan to move New Mexico forward. That team also has to have adequate IT and social work staff. That's an understatement for all of us, and I'll get to some of that in the reality. The other part of the lessons learned is communication. And that, again, is the federal, state, agency, divisional, statewide, regional, county, your legislative, etc. Must have excellent communication. And I want to say from New Mexico, in all of these entities, these federal regulations, New Mexico has utilized and benefited tremendously from the ACF staff in order to identify the regulations, to confirm or clarify our interpretation and how we were going to implement those that met not only the federal regulations and needs, but also those of the agency as well as the children and families that we work with. As with any communication, we've learned the critical thing is keeping the communication flowing consistently and constantly. Keeping the users involved at every point. Teresa talked about that. In New Mexico, IT did bring on business analysts that were to serve as liaisons between the program and technical. And on the program side, we developed a management analyst program unit, which are called the FACT specialists, that represent programs and are tied very closely to policy and procedure initiatives within the protected services, where we're needing to go, where we are going, where we have been. It is the reason there is a critical need for in our state for the management analyst is often IT shops have indicated that when they have hired program staff as liaisons to be in their staff to be between program and technical, is that within a couple of years, because child welfare is changing so much, they've lost their expertise as far as what is relevant and current in the field, or at least it is diminished. Another thing on communication is keeping executive management informed on a regular basis. You will need more resources, and you will need the top managers to get your support, or to support your request. That means not only the changes that need to be made and implemented, as well as having adequate staff in order to meet the demands of the project. The other one that is critical is keeping keep your federal partners informed. They should not be that distant relative. They should be someone that you would be communicating on a regular basis. We have been so blessed by the analysts in all avenues, SACWIS, AFCARs, the technical assistance from WRMA, as well as the National Resource Center on Youth Development on United. The other thing that we wanted to talk about is in communication, you must keep clear, detailed, and extensive written documentation regarding your project. You are going to be juggling many different ones, or at least we are in New Mexico. And so it's very clear to make sure that you have that documentation of your conversations with your federal partners, with other entities, to make sure that you are staying on track and are following what your program needs in compliance. The other one, Joyce did a wonderful job on training and talking about training, and that is just, it is just critical. It's one of those things, whatever you plan for training of your staff, whether it's your user staff who are going to be entering that information directly into your child welfare information system on how and where to enter it and understanding why it's important. And that's a critical one, so they understand it's not just entering data for data's sake, but their process of entering that data, how it impacts a child in custody or that the agency actually has impact with. So we always have a thing is whatever you have a plan for your training of your user staff or anyone else, double it. The other one is training your technical staff and your power users or super users, your management, so that everyone is planning for any new implementations or modifications and maintenance of the system. Often people think that once you've implemented your system, you're done. And in New Mexico, being a Tier 1 SACWA system, we have really had to educate not only within our own agency and our IT shop, but even more importantly, the legislature, because they come back and say, your system, you're Tier 1, you don't need any more money, you are fine. And just what you want are cool tools. And of course, we know that the web has so many advantages. The other thing is just talking a little bit about our reality is that, as we indicated earlier, that SAC, even though a Tier 1 or fully compliant SACWA system is over 16 years old, we do have a plan to move towards a web, and which would be implemented in 2017. So we're talking 20 years from implementation. There's one of the things that we often say, and people will want to discount our current system because it is client-server. One of those challenges that you have is, and we talked about perseverance, is that we have used this time to basically utilize our technology and our know-how to very much get in line with our federal requirements to maximize all the resources that are available to focus on data quality, tracking, reporting, compliance, and outcomes. And so those will not go wasted when we actually transition from our current client-server system into our web. Now, some of the things that in our reality is that, well, first I'll just say it's not easy to incorporate all federal regulations, state law, agency policy and procedure, and best practice into a child welfare system application, while understanding that not always do things fit together nicely like a puzzle. Sometimes things conflict, or there are different purposes for the data. And so one of the things that New Mexico has done in that reality is having this management analyst team that comes together, and the blessing is they have tremendous amount of institutional knowledge. Some of the team have been with the project, the majority of the team have been with the project since implementation. So that means 16 years. And so when we're talking about AFCARs and NTNs and CFSR, we have that institutional knowledge to see where we might have problems as far as overstepping or counteracting a change or having what we call unintended consequences.
Lynette, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we have just about 15 minutes remaining in the webinar, so if we could have you cover NIDed just a little bit and then give us a little time for Q&A, that would be great.
You're great, and actually this is going to be very quick. On NIDed purposely, because it is new, is that I actually have a lot of the information on the slides, and I don't plan to go into detail, so that will go quite quickly. As you see what it collects and the reporting data, and all is tied to the John H. Chahey Independent Program. So I'm going to skip there. The next slide, we're just going to look here, and there are some references for you that are looking at the served population, the baseline population, and the follow-up population, which keeps everybody kind of confused at times. So this is an excellent resource table to find that and to be able to look at where the data requirement elements and the data collection requirements. The other slide, if we go to that, is the United Independent Services living data collected, and that has to do, shows all those services, again, for your reference. And the next slide, slide 30, has the NIDED outcomes area, which shows all the different outcomes that NIDED covers. And then I will show, and the one thing that just is so important in NIDED, and just the emphasis on that, we know nationally that children in foster care who age out of foster care do not have historically good outcomes. And so NIDED is a much needed focus on those teenagers from age 15.5 months of age through their emancipation, through 21, and of course with the new coverage to Medicaid to 26, it is vital. I'm going to focus here just real quickly on some of the New Mexico challenges with NIDED. And that was defining the reporting categories for ourselves. Every state reports the same broad categories for the served population, but every state has different activities under these broad categories that may not be the same. So there's difficulty in showing what the data is compared from state to state. The federal definition around education and grade level is very difficult to work with. The definition is technically the last grade that the youth completed. At least for New Mexico, we have struggled with having that information, particularly with immigration from Mexico and children not having information regarding that last grade completed, not just attended. We currently have a work group and a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Education, the Administrative Office of Courts, and Protective Services, where we're working on getting that information much more easily accessed between the agencies. On challenges, the other is surveying youth who turn 17 while on the 48-hour hold. We are required to survey all children who's 17 while they're in care within 45 days of their 17th birthday. We have children who come into their care within a day or two of their 18th birthday. And as we have all indicated, finding youth to survey at 19 can be difficult as youth change addresses, cell phone numbers, etc. We are seeing that youth are not wanting to stay in touch with us after leaving foster care. I know that's a shock for many of you and receiving services, and we have a difficult time finding them to survey. Our last submission was our first for 19-year-olds, and we failed the penetration rate for the number of youth to participate in the survey. And right now what we're utilizing, we had tried some other types of software, but currently we're using SurveyMonkey to survey our youth, because you can easily enter the data that's not housed in our fax system, and we merge the files prior to creating the XML file for submission, and the data only ever exists in that format. And then just going to the next slide is for NIDED and lessons learned. It paid off to be aware of AFCAR's changes that would end up dovetailing into NIDED. It paid off to be involved in NIDED from the very beginning, and New Mexico learned that data systems are never perfectly built for the differing reporting requirements, so that we can adapt the best we can. And the last slide is, again, resources for you for NIDED. Again, the ACF website. Also notice the link to the National Resource Center for Youth Development and the National Resource Center for Child Welfare Information Data and Technology. Thank you.
Lynette, thank you so very much for the excellent review of these very important federal reporting requirements, et cetera. Now let's move on to our Q&A session. Elizabeth, I'm going to turn this over to you, I guess.
Okay, and actually, Mary, if you could, Mary is our operator, if you could go ahead and let people know how to queue up for Q&A.
Thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question, please press *1. Please unmute your phone and record your name clearly when prompted. Your name is required to introduce your question. To withdraw your request, you may press *2. And it'll be one moment for our first question, please.
Okay, and while we're giving people a minute to get in line, we do have an online question, and I think it's for all three of you. What are some good ways to train your staff when you have a major system upgrade and classroom training is not an option? What works best? Asking supervisors to do the staff training, sending out detailed desk guides, or doing a webinar?
Well, this is Joyce, and I'm gonna look to our two guest presenters, because they're probably a bit more current than I am. So, Tressa or Lynette?
I think actually the best mechanism in Ohio that we have used, honestly, for training is to really involve the users in the testing cycle. So even though we do have we have what we call SAC with deployment calls, and we try to do those at least 2 or 3 weeks in advance of releasing a build. So we do, regular system documentation and reviews of the calls with users, of the deployments with users. And we do knowledge-based articles as well as webinar trainings. And in some counties we do on-site assistance. But I have found, honestly, the most effective thing is involving some of those super users in the testing process in advance of something major being deployed.
This is Lynette, and I concur with Teresa, and kind of one of the answers, all of the above. We have a very detailed fax desktop guide that is meant to be not a manual, but truly a desktop guide, and they could add additional information, fax flows, PowerPoints, et cetera, to, but also, and then having specialized manuals as well for those groups like in-home services, placement providers, supervisors. But we found, and my staff are decentralized, so they're around the state, so they actually are in state county offices. And what we do is when we do a major release, we have been going historically out to the county offices and present in a PowerPoint format so that people feel like they have an opportunity to ask questions. As we all know, on webinars, often people don't like to ask questions. And so we're really exploring multi-types of approaches. We also do, if a county needs some special help, we do some one-on-one training with them as well. But definitely are looking at webinars and other kinds of technologies as resources and funding are being reduced.
Great, thank you, Beth. Mary, do we have anybody on the line with a question?
I'm not showing any questions from the phone lines.
Okay. One thing I would encourage the audience to think about, somebody did IM during our poll on using e-learning and noted that part of the reason we might not have had a higher response rate from our participants today is that there are still many states that aren't doing any form of e-learning. And so, given that, I think I would like to ask them to think about, and if anyone's interested in sharing, how they are doing training and what has proven most effective. While our audience is contemplating that, we do have another online question. It's hard to get resources for development and testing of system enhancements after your SACWIS project is considered as over, quote unquote, by your leadership, and it's almost impossible to get funding for system documentation. Any tips on keeping documentation up to date after the project ends, but you're in the maintenance and operations space?
Well, this is Joyce, and certainly I think we all know that one of the most unfavorite things to do is, particularly I think for developers, is to actually do documentation. And I think it's just a best practice for your organization to have that as part of your development methodology. That documentation has to be current, and certainly to use whatever technology tools you can in terms of version control and that sort of thing. Tressa, Lynette's current experiences?
Teresa, do you want to go first?
I do think it is a challenge, and I think that the leadership needs, like you said, Joyce, to emphasize the importance of it. I know on our team we have some folks who are better at it than others, and we do try to set, share and to reward and to acknowledge good documentation on the team to help inspire or maybe improve some of the skill sets of other staff on the team. And in terms of, the project being over or the system being over, I think, really leadership has a responsibility to help folks understand, that the system really is never, child welfare is never over, and your system really, has to keep pace, as Lynette was talking about, with child welfare changes. So even if it's just new regulations or maybe pilots, which I said we've used in Ohio a lot, and I would say, if anything else, trying to get additional funding through either pilots or state initiatives that you can get investment in to make your system current or more up to date. But I do think documentation is a big challenge. I would agree.
I concur, and I think part of it is how, from the very beginning, one is if you have a vendor that is in doing your system or working with you that is part of your contract, is to provide current and up-to-date documentation, and to not undersell to your management and your leadership that there is an ongoing documentation requirement, and kind of just saying when the feds are involved, there's always documentation, and even in maintenance and operation that is required. And I think the other one to talk about is ownership. In New Mexico, early in our SACWIS cycle, it's like a hot potato. Whose responsibility was it? Was it IT or was it program? And what we've learned is a collaboration. It really is neither. It's actually all the entities as well as your financial people to come together and have pieces of that and come and put that together. But definitely having resources, because that's one of the places that people will quickly cut your resources. So we know it's all, you've got as far as AI, improvement plans, you've got your APD, all of the other kinds, your INCANs, mapping documents, and all of those things as well.
So I think what might be interesting is, Lynette, to follow what happens in New Mexico when you do your migration to web-based application, and you will have 20 years of system documentation and many changes, and it will be interesting to see how supportive that documentation is to your transition project.
Absolutely, and one of our challenges is going to be is that institutional knowledge. Many of the people that have been on my team, the FACT specialists, are going to be retiring during that 4-year period. And so that transfer of institutional knowledge, not only on the program side, but on the IT side, is critical.
Yes, yes.
And the other interesting is while we're doing that transition, we also have to maintain our current client server and making sure that it meets the needs of the field, while having a moratorium on changes that is typical for whenever you're doing a transition like this.
Be very interesting to watch.
Mary, do we have other questions on the line?
I'm not showing any other questions.
Okay, we have more coming in online, so that must be the popular way to send in questions today. Could the presenters speak to how they incorporate other federal reporting requirements, such as the caseworker visit measures, into their SACWIS systems?
Lynette, is that
Sure, I can do that. As we said, our SACWIS system is our child welfare information system, so it is incorporated into the business flow of our workers' workflow. So we have information around visitation that meets the federal requirements for the quantitative data, but we also have information in the documentation about what occurred at those visits, so it is more of a qualitative piece. It's been a challenge as far as you have to have the online functionality, but then you also have to have the back end or the batch functionality to extract the data to make sure it's meeting the calculations of the federal requirements. So it's been a work in progress, and it's one of those new child welfare requirements that had to be incorporated and extracted. In our state, what we have in the mantra is what gets measured gets done. And we have a very proactive process in which we monitor those worker-child visits on a monthly basis to keep the field advised and giving them reminders to make sure that they are getting that not only accomplished but also documented.
And this is Teresa. I would just concur, but our system is the system of record, and all the data basically for our visitation reports comes from the SACWIS system. We have a message board on as you log in, and we frequently post messages on our performance on that message log, so the end users are directly getting where we're at with visits, and we send reminders, that to the caseworkers that they on our message board that they need to enter their visits timely. So we also have business intelligence channel kind of tools that allow county workers to review and visitation data and performance data at the child level and at the unit level.
Elizabeth? Do we have any more chat questions? Hello? Elizabeth?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. We don't have any more in chat, but Mary, do we have anyone queued up for questions on the phone?
I'm not showing anyone.
Okay, then Joyce, before I turn it back over to you, I just would like to thank again all of our audience for their patience during our thunderstorm. I think we managed to stay online most of the time, but if any of you did experience brief lapses in the audio or the video, thank you for your patience. And with that, Joyce, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Let's do a quick wrap-up. We obviously have just completed webinar number 4 out of our 6-part series, or webinar number 3. I'm sorry, I just got ahead of myself. So what was accomplished today? Well, we provided a basic review and refresher of the continued stages of Child Welfare Information System project lifecycle, recapping at a high level implementation, maintenance, and operations, training, and other assorted federal requirements. And in fact, we covered in detail assorted federal requirements from a state perspective from our 2 very distinguished state participants. So Lynette and Tressa, and I again want to thank you so very much for your participation. So what's next? If there are any questions that come in, we will provide follow-up regarding those. And I think there's a couple of components that we may want to consider getting access to, the URL for the Ohio Knowledge Web. And we may want to get the SACWIS components matrix and get that copied or posted or distributed to our attendees. So now the next webinar number 4, will go through some of the common pitfalls and how to avoid them from planning through statewide implementation. So it's the whole life cycle. And that's going to be towards the end of July. Please watch for specifics. Again, a reminder that this webinar has been recorded and will be made available online when it is complete and posted. You will get a message via the SACWIS Managers listserv with the link, which is the one that's on the screen, as all the webinars are posted down at that URL. So we encourage you to submit any specific ideas for future webinar topics to me at joyce@kassets.com. And again, I thank you all for attending. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you for your participation on today's call. The call has concluded. You may disconnect at this time. Thank you. Okay, your speakers are back in a post-conference.
Okay.
And I just want to let you know you had approximately 40